Greetings, exporters. Welcome to our webinar today, IBT Online's webinar on English language markets. And most specifically, how many websites do you need? Do you need lots of different websites for those English markets, English language markets, or will one English language market do? So let's get started and welcome everybody. We're delighted to be with you. Before we actually start the webinar, just a few notes on our housekeeping for this webinar. And many of you will be familiar with this already, but we want just to head out some housekeeping rules. In particular, this current webinar will be about 45 minutes long. We'll have a couple of handouts for you during the webinar, and at the end of it, we're going to have a little very brief survey. We'd really appreciate it if you could answer that survey. That'd be very helpful for us just to make sure that we're on trend and on topic of what are most interest to you. So you will also be getting a recording of this webinar in due course. You can sit back and enjoy and just hopefully learn and enjoy the webinar as we discuss how many websites do you need to capture all those English language markets. So today on our team here in front of you, you have myself in the middle. My name is Susanna Hardy, and I'm the Chief Content Officer for IBT Online. I'm responsible for the webinars and also most of the content that's going out and the presentations that we do. We're really delighted always to give learning assets to our clients and prospects, and to be learning ourselves and discussing the latest trends and views of the online world. On my left is Bella, who's joining us today. Bella is one of our online marketing managers. I'm really pleased that both Bella and Alex could join us. Bella is a German native and speaks German, English, Spanish, and French. And this incredibly impressive knowledge of language, coupled with a background in business administration and management, she's a great team member to help companies use the online environment successfully. And introducing Alex as well on the right hand side of your screen. Alex is also an online marketing manager, an educational background in digital marketing, and he's responsible for posting social media accounts, uploading, editing content on the international websites, and monitoring traffic volumes for many of our international websites. He's a digital native and understands how to keep up with the ever-changing social media trends. So that's the team today. We're really delighted to be here with you. A very quick word also on IBT Online. IBT Online has been around since 2002. We are currently working with over 500 different companies and are very proud to be working on various U.S. state programs as well. We're a U.S. company with an office also in the U.K. and have an international staff of web savvy managers who help clients really reach out and build their online presence. So we are 100% focused on online tools that help exporters grow internationally. Our agenda today, we've really divided up into sort of 5 segments. We thought we'd first start off with talking about, what is the English language market for you as a, as an international company going forward? What does that really mean for you? How many people can you reach with these kinds of websites? And then we wanted to drill down into some of the main markets. There are really 5 big English language markets: Australia, Canada, India, UK, and USA. And then talk about the buyer's journey. And by that, we mean sort of, why do you have websites? You have websites in order to do business, in order to get sales. So how does your website help you in those particular markets? And then we'll do some case studies about how clients are currently doing business, and then finally some takeaways and a little bit of Q&A. We do really encourage you to add questions. Just drop them into the chat box or question box, and we will get back to them at the end of the presentation. So let's talk first about those 1.5 billion people, potential customers. And I think what we wanted to outline from the beginning really is some of the sort of the 3 steps to what we would call the buyer's journey in these markets. So, as a salesman, as someone in marketing, you will be very aware of those sort of key steps of awareness, consideration, and decision that any client needs in order to actually make a sale. In an online world, that means that corresponds to being found, being understood, and then finally deciding to do business. So that buyer's journey in the English speaking markets is what we're going to be talking about. And this is true whether you're B2C or B2B or whatever. They're basically those three steps. And your job really as an exporter is to help this prospective client to take those steps. Now let me turn to Bella, who's done a lot of work about mapping different languages across the globe, including English. So Bella, good morning, Bella. Hi.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Susanna. It's great to be here today and talk about the English language markets. And as Susanna mentioned, I am German, and similar to many other English speakers, English is only my second language. And I'm not alone. It's estimated that over 1.5 billion people across the globe speak English as first or a second language, and that is about 20% of the world's population. And as you can see on the map here, lots of the countries in the world are particular Anglophone. So we have 63 countries speaking English as an official language worldwide. And for those who are wondering which three countries this applies to in Europe, it's Ireland, the United Kingdom, and Malta. But let's get a bit more into detail. So even though 63 countries list English as an official language, in reality, English is de facto official language in just a handful of countries. So here we have the ones, and it's Australia and New Zealand, Canada, India, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So in fact, just 375 million claim English as their native language. And the other countries have English as an official language by law, but not necessarily used by the majority of the population or as first language. But there are also some differences in English used by these big five countries in pronunciation or in grammar, in vocabulary, or in colloquialisms. So more than 1,000 different English accents exist, such as, for instance, American English or Australian English, British English, or Canadian English. And that's not the only important point to know. So like all other languages, English is constantly changing and adapting. And until recently, words like, for instance, text or friend were simple nouns. But now you could also say sentences like I'll text you or why don't you friend me? So they are also used as verbs nowadays. And another interesting point about English, as it's so widely spoken as the second or third language in the world, hybrid forms are coming up. Typically, those are combining elements of the standard English with local dialects across the country. So just to give you an example, in India, you can find Hinglish, which is a mix of Hindi and English, Benglish, which is a mix of Bengali and English, and Tanglish, Tamil and English. And to not disappoint you, there are also some great news for your business. It's that you can connect with a great number of people through your website. So there are still a lot of people who can get connected through English.
Thanks, Bella. Terrific. Now let's talk about those number of people. Let's just set the scene first for the online world. Just this slide that you have in front of you just shows you in terms of the total population of the world. We now have well over nearly 4.5 billion people. That's 58% of the world's population connected online. This is, I think, an amazing fact just to remember. So, despite all the controversy at the moment around privacy and hacking, fake news, and all that stuff, we're still going online and using it for social media. In fact, it's actually still very high growth. Global digital growth, was up 9% in 2018. So that means over 360 million people came online for the first time. So that's just in 2018. So very strong. So, and not just getting online every day now and then. The average time spent per person is 6.5 hours a day. So this growth is clearly fueling social media use as well. And 45% of the world's population are now social media users, as you can see there on the slide as well. And how has the internet affected how you do business overall? How has it made you change? And that's obviously a big topic in itself, but I wanted to put it on a sort of a diagram, and this is a diagram from the European Commission, which I thought was quite useful. As you can see, basically the internet has forced businesses to be much more customer centric. So your clients and prospects can and will connect to each other, and they now demand to have what they want, when they want, how they want. And your job in terms of sales and marketing is to try and influence in a positive way all those interconnecting little black arrows to make sure your clients and prospects actually find you and remember who you are and what you do, and that they understand what you do and trust you enough to consider you for their next purchase. Now, how has this come about? How in what way has the internet forced everybody to be more customer centric? And for that, I wanted to really just zoom back into how search engines work, because search engines are fundamentally customer or searcher centric. So there's a large number of search engines in the world, but Google is by far the most dominant. And in the Anglophone world, it's by far the most dominant as well. It has over 90% market share in the UK and Australia, and about 65 market share in the US and Canada, and about also 90% in India. But I think what's important to note about this search engine is not just that they're customer centric. So it means that anyone in Canada goes on to Google Canada. And that's not the same Google as, say, California or in the UK or in Australia. So search engines try to satisfy the searcher rather than the company you're trying to be found. So if a business located in Toronto looks on the internet for a supplier, Google will prioritize companies that are most relevant to that searcher. So, for example, based near Toronto or at least in Canada, and that suit a Canadian audience. So, for example, have Canadian dollar prices and use metric measurements. So the search engine looks through all its billions of documents and JPEGs and videos, and it does two things. First, it gives those results that are relevant and useful to a searcher's query. And then second, it ranks the results according to popularity and the uh, and the quality of the websites. So this means that optimizing your website for a search engine is to try and influence both the relevance and the popularity of that website. So you have to please Google in a sense and make sure that Google thinks you're relevant for each one of your target clients. So clearly, using a US website to be relevant to someone in Canada or the UK or India is therefore not a good idea. It's just not relevant enough for a searcher. So a bit of a spoiler alert here. How many English language websites do you need? Well, you actually need several to be credible across Anglophone markets. This is just a little example I wanted to show you of a very banal little search. I got my US colleague to click into her Google, which is google.com, and say red shoes. And she gets results about Macy's, Nordstrom, DSW, Bloomingdale's, things like that. I go onto google.co.uk, so Google in the UK, type in red shoes. I get a very significantly different set of results that are relevant to me sitting here in the UK. So this is just a little trite example of what it is to have localized websites. And I guess the just drilling down and just listing this, we wanted to list you on one slide the 10 criteria that we believe make for a localized customer-centric website. So you can see that adapting to the local language is one criteria out of the 10, but there are many others as well. Some of them rather technical, like content management systems and hosting, and some of them more sort of more subjective, which is about sort of cultural aspects and design and things like that. But in each case, they put the customer at the center of it. So that's, I think, the important part that we wanted to drill down onto. Now let's drill down into some of those big Anglophone markets, the big market profiles: Australia, Canada, India, UK, and USA. Let's take a look at some of those. Alex, do you want to talk a bit about Australia?
Yeah, thanks, Susanna, and good day to everyone listening in. So Australia is one of the top countries when it comes to the online world, with 87% of the total population being online. You can also see from this slide there are also more mobile phones in Australia than people, which is just an indicator as to how Australians access and use the internet. They're also a sociable bunch, with over 70% being active on social media. So let's take a look at the social media side of Australia. So some 18 million people, which is 72% of the population, are active social media users. There's no surprise to see that Facebook tops the social media platforms with over 16 million users. Instagram, which is also owned by Facebook, is also popular. And LinkedIn as well has had a real boost lately, which is up 10% over 2018. The two losers, on the other hand, have been Twitter and Snapchat, which is something we're seeing in several other international markets as well. Online shopping as well has seen a big growth, and Australia punches above its weight in e-commerce. It's growing at 24% last year and continuing to grow in 2019 as well. One of the things that really struck me was the number of Australians using voice search or voice command. About a quarter of internet users use voice command, and all the evidence points to this as a growing trend. This is really important for you as a company, as it means you have to be even better at making sure you are relevant. Voice command means that people no longer see a page of search results, but they just hear one or two results which have been cherry picked by that search engine, which means for your business, you need to be highly relevant to the searcher. So now let's take a look at Canada, and back to you, Susanna.
Many thanks, Alex. Yeah, these are some of the things, some of these things we'll see again in some of the other markets. For example, in Canada, we also see that very plugged in place. I mean, 91% of the population online and nearly 2/3 of them on social media. Again, very similar to those markets like Australia, and we'll see the other big mature markets of the Anglophone world. I wanted also to share these images here for you. These are actually come from an infographic we've produced, and actually on your desktop, you should be able to see those handouts. You'll see that there are 3 handouts to this webinar, and the Canada infographic. You can grab that on your screen now and download it. And if you want more information on that, we have a lot more information on our website, and assets that you can download for free, that we make available to you. So for Canada, one of the things I wanted to highlight as well for Canada was just the domain names, and in particular the country top level domains. And for Canada, that's .ca for Canada. So and Canadians use the .ca, or they'll also use .com. But the more specialized tasks you get, the more things require trust or real customer engagement, the more Canadians go to the .ca and not the .com. So I think that's worth pointing out, and I think it's important you realize that that's similar to other markets as well. So these are these top-level domain names: .ca for Canada, .au for Australia, .co.uk for the UK, which become really important as a sort of subliminal point of trust for the buyer's journey, and something you'll see is important for all of markets. For historical reasons, Canada is a linguistically complex nation. There are like 67 different Indian, Aboriginal tongues there in Canada, and there's a lot of rises of other languages as well. But if we just focus on the 2 main languages, that's English and French, 58% of the population claim English, and 20% Francophone as their mother tongue. I just wanted to highlight that Quebecois French is significantly different to the French spoken in France. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself if you're targeting the Canadian market is whether your website should be in Canadian English or Quebecois French, or both. So that's an important point to get right from the very beginning. If you're going to go on to a .ca in order to build trust with your Canadian audience, should you have a Canadian English, Canadian French, or both? That's one of the keys. Now I want to turn quickly to India, this vast, vast country where 41% of the population are online, but that still represents over 500 million people. Equally, sort of, just 20%, 21% use social media, but that's still nearly 300 million people. So these are simply vast numbers, and it's interesting because India is also one of the big last battlegrounds really for the big players. Whether it's search engines, Google has a massive market share at the moment, but Baidu is really getting a lot of traction in the non-English websites in India. So again, a lot of the big players and the global players in the internet world are looking closely at India and playing for market share there. On this slide here, you can see just how vibrant the social media world is in India. Well, I said that just 21% are using social media. It's still a vast number of people, and in fact, Facebook. India is Facebook's largest single market, significantly larger than the USA. US 190 million, India's 260 million people are using Facebook. So, this really vast market, very actually very plugged in, despite the number of the relatively low penetration rate of 41%, very, very active on social media, and worth having a look at. So now let's look at the UK. Alex, perhaps you could take us through the UK.
Sure, thanks, Susanna. So the UK market is edging closer towards total saturation, with the penetration in the UK currently standing at 95%. The growth of active social media users in the UK is also slowing due to the fact that the majority of eligible audiences already use it. Overall, the penetration of social media in the UK market saw a rise of just 1% over the last year, moving from 66% of the total population in 2018 to 67% by January 2019. This just shows us that social media is now an ingrained part of everyday life in the UK. Despite being one of the most socially connected markets in the world, the UK is experiencing a drop in the time spent on social platforms each day. In 2018, the average time spent on the social platforms was 1 hour 54 minutes in 2019, which has now fallen to 1 hour 50 minutes. It may feel like a minor change, but when it compared to the record holders in the Philippines, which stands at 4 hours and 12 minutes per day, or even the global averages at 2 hours and 16 minutes, the opportunities for marketers to reach British audiences seems more limited. While the likes of YouTube, Facebook and Messenger, WhatsApp and Instagram are still leading the charge in terms of user numbers in the UK, we're seeing growing platforms such as Twitch, WeChat and Reddit becoming increasingly more popular hubs for subcultures online. In terms of e-commerce, the British public is embracing it with open arms as well. According to our latest findings, 81% of internet users in the UK have now bought a product or service online, with 45% of us now feeling comfortable purchasing items via mobile devices. Now let's see how the USA compares. Back to you, Susanna.
Thanks very much, Alex. And just also to say, this is another infographic that we're making available to you. Again, you can drag that off your screen or go to our website and have a look at the information we have about the UK market in particular that you can download on that. Right, the USA, I did note that a lot of our registrants for today's webinar are from the US, and but it's worth nevertheless highlighting a few things about it. It is obviously a market which is the one of the world leaders. Internet users, I mean, it's absolutely like the UK that Alex has mentioned, very much a saturated market, 95% of the population use the internet. And social media, 70% of the U.S. population are using the internet on a daily basis. So this really is what we would call pretty well near saturation. The average daily time that an American spends online, 6.5 hours. And 86% of people in the USA go on the internet daily. So how about that? This is really when we talk about the internet being ubiquitous and so on. This is really the showing up in the numbers. This is really confirmed um, that the way to reach people, the way to that the internet and social media are a totally integrated part of everyday life and in throughout the entire USA. So now let's talk a bit about the buyer's journey that we talked about earlier. We mentioned earlier. I wanted to drill down a little bit into that and how that affects you in these different Anglophone markets. And this is again, a repetition of that slide we saw earlier about that sort of those buyer's journey and the elements you need, the criteria you need to gain that trust in order to have sales. The first of all, your prospects in other markets, whether they're in Canada or India, USA, need to find you, and they need to find you easily. They need to understand you totally and understand you at all levels, both the superficial level and a deeper level, in order to trust you and therefore do business with you. So the awareness, consideration, and decision, and how to get that on a smooth journey for the buyer's journey is through really this localized websites. So how can we look at that a little bit more? Sort of, we talked a bit the first part about getting found and how search engines work, and therefore getting found means having a localized website, say a Canadian website for your Canada exports, a UK website for your UK exports, and being understood comes at different levels too. It comes at the levels of obviously the language, like keywords, but it also comes in terms of things like culturally appropriate images, but also at a deeper level, so almost subliminal, a digital level for websites. So you need to be having the right domain names. So we talked about, to be hosted locally. You need to have compliance. Absolutely, this is getting more and more important. Let's look at some of these that we mean when we talk about being understood and building the trust that you need to execute sales in different markets. So here's an example of localizing keywords. And this is sort of, I guess, a pretty obvious one for many people. It's, the difference between gas and petrol. If you're a U.S. company and that is involved in, say, the automobile industry, you may well be looking for people who search for gas-related products. And if you're doing that in the USA, you would be right to use the word gas, because 96% of people looking for those products will search with the word gas. In India, however, it's the opposite. 69, 70% of the people looking for those products will use the word petrol. And this is just an example of making sure that you have the right keyword for the right market. So there are lots and lots of examples with this. And with the Anglophone markets, it's often quite subtle. But don't think that just because you're being found in one market, that you will be easily found in another market. The keywords very often differ. And in the internet world, in the online world, it's all about those details. Let's look also at the relevancy. This is also one of the big points that we mean when we talk about building trust that you need for final decisions. Relevancy can be anything from obvious things like, currency. Are you using the right currency? Are you using pounds in England? Are you using Australian dollars? Measurements. I mean, the USA is one of the last imperial measurement places. Everywhere else is metric. Are you sure that everything is easily seen in metric terms? For the UK, for India, even for Canada, it's more metric than the USA. Images, make sure that your images are relevant to that market, as relevant as you possibly can. And this goes again to, the testimonials. Nothing speaks more to a potential client than having someone he can easily identify with and recognize, a neighboring competitor, let's say, giving a testimonial. And contact details. Is it easy for your prospect to find you and contact you? And then finally, obviously, delivering to pay. And if you have an e-commerce site, the obvious delivery and payment options. Behind the web, it also gets important, and this is something that people often sort of also don't always think about in the very beginning, but when you're looking at international websites, you need to host locally. Otherwise, you're going to be slow on upload and download, and people will just simply not pay attention, will not last. They won't bother listening in. As Google is looking, 2 seconds is a threshold and things like that, and but 2 seconds is actually too slow for Google. And content management systems, this is sort of the architecture which is used to build websites. Not all content management systems work across different markets. So you have to be very careful. And if you want more information on that, please give us a call and we can go through the different types of CMSs that work well across international markets. I wanted also to mention digital compliance. This is really a tsunami coming at you. And if you take, just a couple of things away from this webinar, it's please make sure that you are compliant online. The sort of gold standard at the moment is very much the European one, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which came in force a year ago, and is really being echoed around the world. The CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, is very much a mirror image of GDPR. Canada's anti-spam legislation, which is coming equally, it's like GDPR. India, same thing. So these are digital compliance, which really have to be followed. It's very important. There's nothing worse for your brand and your reputation than someone going onto your website in your local country and seeing you are not secure. That does not breed confidence that you need to have. So let's now talk about doing business and what we mean by that. And again, I would invite you to go to our website, and we have a long list of testimonials and companies that we've worked with. And you can go through and look at some of them, and then see which ones are most relevant to you, and look through some of that. But in all cases, the key is really to say, these are websites which create relevance in the target markets, and therefore, build your brand and your awareness. It lets you get found and be understood, and therefore do business in these local markets. Let's give some precise examples. I want to turn back to Alex to talk about a UK client. Alex?
Thanks, Susanna. So this is a case study about a UK company called WDM. They're the leaders in road repair, and they make machines that analyze roadways. So their clients are typically large authorities or government agencies. They identified the USA as a prime target market, and in discussion with them, it was clear that the main function of the website was really to grow brand awareness and reinforce the brand credibility of the USA. I've added the pie charts to this slide just to show you the importance of getting the right terms. In the US, nearly everybody uses the term highway when they go online to look for information, while in the UK it is evenly split between highway and motorway. So you can see that if you're not using the right key terms in your target market, you're really losing out. So for example, if you used motorway for the USA, only 3% of people searching would easily find you. So that is what we did for keyword research for WDM, but we also made sure the trucks, case studies, and images examples would all feel familiar to a US audience as well. So for example, there's no discussion of lorries, only trucks. The images that we used for the US site showed US style trucks driving on the right side of the road. And obviously all the measurements and contact details relate to a US audience as well. And as a result of this, WDM are really pleased with their US growth and business development. Now over to Bella to look at another example.
Thanks, Alex. I have another great example, Bullman Products. And Bullman is a great example of a company using localized websites to grow their exports. So Bullman is a US privately held company that sells internationally via e-commerce, but also distributors. And they sell to lots of different verticals, such as schools or retailers or even florists. And we work together with Bullman to create localized websites in different markets and also different English-speaking markets, such as the United Kingdom or Australia or Singapore. And that makes Bullman a great example for localized English-speaking websites. And one part of our job with Bullman is creating blogs on a monthly basis. And even though the general topic and industry are remaining the same through all the different markets, the content needs to be localized. So just as an example, we recently created a blog about the barbecue season, targeting butchers and delis in the different countries. And for instance, for the UK, barbecue was a common keyword we used, but for the Australian market, another typical word for barbecue would be Barbie. So we had to adapt the blog to the Australian English. And that's not the only thing we have to adapt for our blog. So as Susanna mentioned, things like seasons, measurement, currencies, and other types of localization play an essential role during our blog writing process. And I think Susanna has another good example.
Thank you, Bella. Yes, I wanted to also to highlight this company here, Rollright. And again, this is a U.S. company, and again, you can listen to the testimonials on our website. But it's a U.S. company, and they have, it's very hard to have brand recognition in their field. So one of the key things they wanted to have is some brand recognition. It's very difficult in their market. So really working their websites became a very important part of their business strategy. And in the end, we built 8 international websites for them. But you can see they have an American website, an English website, a Canadian, and an Australian. So they have 4 English language or so-called English language websites, each one of them localized for that individual market. Now each one is optimized for the search engine, Google Australia, with the terminology, with all the things that go with it, hosted in Australia, and so on. So these this is sort of working really to build brand awareness and build up some kind of traction awareness and therefore consideration for their individual markets. And again, one of the key things, well, they do something called tarp master. They do tarp or tarpaulin. Just to give you an example on that is, this is their key product. 90% of people in the USA use the word tarp. And the mirror image of that in the UK, 90% of UK people use the word tarpaulin and have never heard of the word tarp, for example. So it's really, it comes at a very, very basic level, but it's really important to get each one of the details right in your website. So I wanted to leave you also with just a thought about sort of, one of the key things that we look at with clients right from the start is to make sure that you're defining your goals right from the start. So why do you have that website? Why are you going for that UK website or that Australian website? Is it to build brand awareness? Is it to help your distributor? Is it to generate leads? And if so, in which proportion? It can be for several of those, but in which ones? And defining those goals, then choosing the metrics that you need to have, analyzing, learning from them, and making sure refreshing the website on a regular basis, making sure that these are reviewed and learned from and changed ongoing, so the website remains a live and efficient tool to help you on the buyer's journey. So that's sort of the main thing. So I wanted to just leave you with one or two takeaways, really. And then I do see that there's a lot of questions that have come in. So our key real takeaway, I think, is again this sort of mantra we have, this slide. We really feel that the exporters, as a company that's exporting, you need to have websites because the world is online. And so all of those prospects that you want in your target export markets are online and can be reached online via localized websites allowing you to manage and successfully navigate the buyer's journey, the buyer's journey of being found, awareness, consideration that's being understood, and buying, building trust, and finally of doing business and decision. So those localized websites. And with that, we're going to turn to some questions. And I note I'm going to turn straight to Alex, actually, for this first question. The first question coming in is, do keywords change, and how often should you be checking the keywords? Alex?
Okay, so yes, ideally, as languages are constantly changing, keywords will need to change eventually. So for instance, if we take the example of Google Ads campaigns, what you need to do is select the appropriate keywords that are involved with your business to start with, and then create those Google Ads based on those keywords. So once this is done, you need to then regularly check the keyword performance to see what searches are triggered by those ads to make sure that they're relevant to you and link back to the original keywords you want to rank for. So that's just one example of how you need to check keywords regularly.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much, Alex. And Bella, maybe you could take the next one. Um, uh, what about keyword research for blogs and social media, Bella?
Um, yeah, definitely. You have to do a keyword research for blogs. So it's an important part of SEO, the search engine optimization, and it's important for your website that you do it on every time you write a blog. So whenever we write a blog, we do a keyword research first in order to see the keywords, which keywords have a good search volume, and for the topic we want to write about, what keywords should we use. But also meta tags are an important part of this whole process. So we are adding titles, keywords, or a short description, which is visible in the search engine and which improves our ranking in Google or other search engines.
Thank you, Bella. Just last question we have here is about GDPR compliance. And, is GDPR compliance enough for other markets as well? So if we're GDPR compliant, there's a couple of questions on GDPR, so I'm going to sort of lump them together. GDPR compliance is really a sort of a top level of digital compliance. And if you're GDPR compliant, you can assume that you are compliant for other things. I noted California, for example, Consumer Privacy Act, or the Canadian anti-spam. GDPR is certainly you would qualify for all of those as well. So yes, if you're GDPR compliant, and becoming GDPR compliant will allow you to be compliant for those other digital norms as well. I guess last quick question I'm getting in now is about UK websites. Is it best to have a .co.uk domain name or a .eu name? Indeed, there's lots of different domain names that you can choose from, and typically we would go through clients and say, what is your objective? Are you targeting, English speakers in the UK? Are you targeting English speakers in Europe? Where do you want to get your leads from? And we would discuss with the client what their best country specific top level domain name would be. As a rule of thumb, the more specific you get, the better for your search engine results. But if you're willing to take a longer term approach, you can take a .eu and then even have like a backslash for the individual countries. So there's a lot of different choices you can make that we would discuss with the prospective client, with our clients, to really decide and really focus in that meet their website objectives. Thank you very much. Our time is sort of up now. Thank you very much. I really want to thank Bella and Alex, especially for joining in today. And thank you all for attending. I do know there are more questions. We will get back to you on that. And I do also want to leave you with just a request to fill out that survey at the end of the webinar. Thank you all very much, and happy exporting all. Thank you. Bye-bye.